I need more money.
We're a small market team. Fine players with the money that we do have.
There's a championship team that we could afford because everyone else undervalues them, like an island of misfit toys.
We're gonna shake things up. You don't put a team together with a computer.
Billy Beane has tried to reinvent a system that's been working for years.
I say it's just getting started.
What is happening in Oakland?
It defies everything we know about baseball.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to In Case You Missed It. This is the show where we talk about movies that maybe flew under your radar or you didn't see or maybe haven't heard of. My name is Josh, and I'm here with my co-host, Scott.
Hello.
And we're here to talk about movies that maybe we think you should give a chance to if you never saw them or not. I guess we'll see with this one because Scott had never seen this movie until we decided to do this episode. But today's movie is Moneyball, the 2011 film directed by Bennett Miller, starring Brad Pitt and Jonah Hill, which follows the Oakland Athletics Major League Baseball team in their 2002 season. And the Oakland A's are a very low-budget, poor team compared to a lot of teams in the major leagues. And on paper, this should be one of the most boring movies ever made, I think.
Yes.
Because the whole premise is, it's based on a book by Michael Lewis, who wrote The Big Short as well. But the whole point is they're trying to use statistics and analytics to find players that are undervalued throughout the league so they can fill out their roster with the money that they have. Very boring stuff. But this is actually the movie that I've probably watched the most in my life over and over again. For whatever reason. I just find it fascinating. But I've been waiting a long time to hear what Scott thinks about it. So I'm very curious. If you want to go into it, what did you think?
So like Josh said, I've never seen this movie before. I don't know. It's always been on my list, but I never watched it. And having seen it, it's a big pile of genuinely pretty good. I did like it. In doing some like research about this movie after I watched it, this is a lot of people's favorite movie. Mm-hmm. Like at least nerds that like make videos about it on YouTube. This is a lot of people's favorite movie. I totally get it. I don't know if it's quite up there for me. Mm-hmm. And there's a few things that don't quite register with me, which we'll get to. But no, I thought it was really good. Just in broad terms, this movie is. I love a movie that feels very crafted. And I think that's Bennett Miller's style. Like all the and Aaron Sorkin, who wrote it, and Steve, help me out.
Steve Zalian.
And he wrote like, my understanding is he wrote the like draft, maybe the draft when Steven Soderbergh was going to direct this.
Yeah.
Maybe. And then Aaron Sorkin, I think when Bennett Miller came on, Aaron Sorkin was asked to like really just punch it up because Aaron Sorkin even said like, I can't do much to improve this script. So, but just a lot of static cam. The cinematography is gorgeous.
Yeah.
A lot of static camera, but just like shots feel very composed. The blocking's very deliberate. It's Aaron Sorkin dialogue. It flows. It's musical, but it's also very deliberate. It's not flabby. Yeah. So I love the way it feels as I'm watching. And that's not the only way to make a movie, but I do love movies that, God, it just everything feels like they just spent hours setting up every shot.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is actually, speaking of the cinematography, it was shot by our previous Lord and Savior, Wally Pfister.
Wally.
Who, if you don't know, was the cinematographer for Chris Nolan, I think up through The Dark Knight Rises for the most part. And you had a run-in with him.
I did have the pleasure of meeting Wally Pfister once. Because I was lucky and I got to work on The Dark Knight Rises in the New York unit. And I was a PA on that movie in the office. And during pre-production for like the New York shoot, I was refilling the refrigerator with sodas. And this guy came up and he started chatting with me while I was loading. And I gave him a soda because he was looking for one. And we kind of talked for a bit. Very nice guy. And then as I walked back to my desk, I thought, oh, they said Wally's coming in today. Because I didn't know what he looked like. So I was like, I should look him up. And sure enough, that was Wally, who I gave a soda to. Very nice man, though. Very, very nice man. And I haven't watched the Dark Knight trilogy in a while. this does not like I had no idea he filmed this, and I wish he'd film more movies like this because, like I said, I just love the Dark Knight trilogy doesn't look like this. Inception doesn't look like this.
No,
it's amazing. He has that kind of range where he can film something that's broad and epic. But he can also film something very grounded and just. This is, like you said, the subject matter of this is begging to be boring.
Yeah.
So it's about artistry to make this work, and I think
totally,
certainly from his point of view, this he did. He really made this movie gorgeous, especially because these guys work in like tunnels under the stadium with no window. I'm like, with fluorescent lighting, and I'm like, this just looks great.
It does, yeah.
Josh, are you a big baseball fan?
You know what? I was earlier in my life. I grew up. We both grew up in Ohio, and I was a huge Cleveland Indians fan growing up. Now the Cleveland Guardians. But that was like that team was like huge for me, and that was when they were really great. I think at the late '90s, early 2000s. So I was really going to a lot of games. I was watching a lot of games. So right this time that this movie takes place is kind of right in, I guess, the tail end of when I was really into baseball, which maybe is a bias that I have towards it then. And also David Justice was my favorite player on the Cleveland Indians. So seeing him in this movie was a really cool surprise when I first saw it. But aside from that, I think that's like my big bias towards it. But for some reason, I just keep coming back to this movie and watching it. And I think what it comes down to is not necessarily the baseball, but just the writing and the performances. And it's become like a comfort movie to me now. This movie opens with the Oakland A's playing the Yankees in the 2001 American League Division Series, and they lose. And we get introduced to Brad Pitt, where he's just sitting alone in the empty Oakland Coliseum Stadium, just listening to a radio. And
plays Billy Beane.
Yes, Billy Beane. He's the general manager of the Oakland A's. And I from that moment, I'm like, I could just watch Brad Pitt just sit and listen to the radio all day. Just because it's so captivating for me for some reason. And
that shot of him is the best example of the cinematography that I love. I love that I love the repetition of the chairs. I love that he's backlit. I love that backlight is because he's sitting in the stands, and I love that light that's lighting him from the back. It's also just got little highlights on every little chair. It's like Christmas lights. It looks. Yeah. I love that shot, but that doesn't happen. Beautiful. Like I think when people watch movies, they don't. Sometimes people think that just happens. No, that's deliberate. Like Wally and Bennett or whoever was part of that decided, let's light him from the back so he's silhouetted, which looks great. And on all that light is going to just add little pops of light and shadow all around this frame. It's gorgeous.
Yeah, absolutely. And one fun fact I want to throw in about Wally Pfister. He was actually not originally the cinematographer on this movie. He came in during pre-production because the previous director of photography, Adam Kimmel, during pre-production was arrested in Connecticut on sexual assault and weapons and explosives possession charges and was replaced by Wally Pfister.
I mean, that just sounds like the sort of outlandish, kooky artist you want on your movie.
Exactly. But quite an upgrade for them, I'd say. I mean, I don't know really Adam's work, but
yes.
Can't go wrong with Wally.
But yeah, so the A's suck.
They did. Well, the thing is, they do. It's funny because they get to the American League Division Series on their budget, which is, I guess, it's the top 8. That's in the top 8 teams in the league, both the National and American League. So they don't they're played off to be that they suck, or at least that now that they've lost that game, the season's over. Now they're losing their players. They're kind of superstar players. Now they're going to suck.
Well, and now the emphasis during this sequence in the opening where they're losing the last game of the season, like you said, they're losing. They do show that they're playing the Yankees, and they emphasize that the Yankees' annual budget is like $114 million, whereas the A's is like 34, something like
30,
that.
yeah, somewhere in there,
30-ish.
yeah.
To just emphasize they're losing to a team that has a lot more money to spend, and so they're kind of highlighting, and Billy talks about this later, that it's an unfair game because people have more money to spend. Some people have more money to spend on players than others.
Yep. Very true. Yeah. So and then it gets into, after they lose that game, now their big star players' contracts are up, and they're going to be losing these players because they can't pay them to keep them. But the Yankees can, and the Red Sox can. So they're losing, Johnny Damon, Jason Giambi, Isringhausen was one of their pitchers, just because they can't keep them. And it really starts on this spiral of Billy just trying to figure out what he can do to try to figure this out. And I love that we get into, I like what the scouts kind of represent in this movie, where, these are guys that are trying to replace these superstar players. But the way that they're looking at things is so weird and feels so archaic.
It's superficial. A lot of it's superficial. It has nothing to do. It has nothing to do with their ability as an athlete.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. They look at, it's like, this guy has a good face. He's got a good jaw. He's got a good swing. The ball explodes off his bat. And Billy's like, well, if he's a good hitter, why doesn't he hit good?
Or we can't use him. He's got an ugly girlfriend.
Yeah.
So he lacks confidence, which I actually saw. Apparently that was sort of a real conversation, but apparently the actual thing was he didn't want this guy. They didn't want this guy because he has an ugly girlfriend, because they said that means he has bad eyesight. Which I would have used that. I think that's funnier. That's a better line.
That is funny.
Which is worth pointing out. Actually, this movie's funny.
It's very funny.
It's got great. It's not a comedy, but it's got that great Sorkin-esque wit about it that just it almost just takes you by surprise every now and then, that you just find yourself laughing.
Yeah.
And like you said, this movie is so much about 150 years of baseball. The way they think about it is archaic, and all his scouts are old men. And and that was definitely a deliberate choice to be like, well, these are old men who think in an old way. The interesting thing is, to tell a story that makes perfect sense, but I think I think those guys aren't being unreasonable in the sense that, like, as far as guys that are good looking, it's guys that are, and this is true of every professional sport, who can we build a brand around? Mm-hmm. It's not just about, you need them to win games. That's the best way, but it is a thing where, and this movie has a lot of flashbacks to Billy's career as a player. Mm-hmm. And one thing they even talked about, he's atop of everything else, he's a good looking guy. Incidentally, I love it's how is young Billy less handsome than Brad Pitt? Like,
it's true.
I've got the first thing. It took me a while to be until they bring up text in the flashback. This is Billy B, and I'm like, that's an ugly ass Billy. Good thing Billy hit a glow up at like 30. But it is. There was parts of this movie, and it all works in service of the story, but it's actually not as much as it's presented as such. These guys aren't being unreasonable in the way they're thinking about it. Now, in that meeting you were talking about, Billy does point out a lot of what they're saying. Well, we need guys that are basically brandable. Yeah, that's a word. And Billy points out, rightfully so, well, yeah, can we afford any of them? No. Right. Then what the hell are we talking about here?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, and that's kind of the idea behind it too, is you have to have the money to spend on it.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the thing. I think the thing I like about this movie is just the themes within it are ones that I don't think I've seen explored very much elsewhere, of, challenging traditions, breaking down old concepts, and like questioning, why are we still doing things this way? Why there's got to be better ways to do things now, and innovation, and using the information that you have about players and whatever. I think it's just a really cool just analogy of how innovation and progress, just themes like that. And it's interesting because, we get young Billy flashbacks throughout and kind of learn that he himself was kind of one of those guys that these scouts were looking at and saying, oh, he's a 5-tool player. He's got everything. He's going to be huge when he gets, he's going to have an amazing career. And, he doesn't. He kind of falls apart. He could have gone to college. He could have gotten, his scholarship, but he didn't. He took the money and played a few seasons and kind of didn't really make it. And on his own accord decided he wanted to become a scout just because he knew that he wasn't going to be, as good as these other guys. And it's even questioning, like, later when he's talking to the scout later, he's like, this is about your shit, isn't it? He's like, look, I've sat with you with those players and their parents, and you say, when it comes to your son, I know. And you don't know that for sure. So it's cool to see, like, his history being kind of a catalyst for him wanting to change things.
Now, I want to stress, I don't know shit about baseball. I'm not going to pretend to know. So I'm going to approach this because I do know anyone who knows baseball, a lot of people who know baseball in reference to this movie will tell you that there were a lot of other factors besides Moneyball that contributed to the team's success over this and all this other stuff. I'm looking at this just simply as a story, not because of this is how it happened in reality, but as a story. But I do think it would make sense from a story point to lean this towards, like, I like that Billy's, I don't think he wants to make certain mistakes. And that comes up a couple times, like you said, where his head scout calls him out about this is all your shit. And I think it would be easy to lean Billy's character into this idea of, well, I don't want to dash another young man's future because of that. But that's not it. And as the movie points out, he doesn't spend time with the players. He doesn't want to get to know the players. This is a business transaction. But I think that's an interesting with Billy. He's actually very calculated. In fact, I even wrote a note here that why does Billy hate baseball? Because I think there's resentment. I think, and certainly up to that point, I think Billy hates baseball. I think he resents baseball. I think it's all he knows, so it's kind of this thing. And they said in a flashback, he got a full ride to Stanford to play baseball. And as we see, he turned it down to go play in the major leagues. And this happens constantly with high school, college athletes who get brought up to the pros and then just they don't do as well. They don't succeed. And so it is a roll of the dice. And I think that's what the film's trying to illustrate, certainly with that conversation where he fires his head scout, is that if nothing else, baseball was we're just rolling the dice and hoping, cross your finger. Here's several $1 million to come play for us. And we're just going to cross our fingers. You don't fuck it up.
Right.
But you're out of here if you do.
Exactly. Yeah. I like that it's, even like, not to get too far ahead, but the players that they do bring in, he's not like afraid to get rid of those guys too. Like the guys that they brought in that they think are going to change things. He's not afraid to get rid of them if they're not being used the way that he thinks they should be used. So he's not opposed to changing his way, not necessarily changing, but going with the flow and seeing what's actually working, but still sticking to his overall beliefs of where he wants to go.
And I think, like we talked about in that one scene with his scouts, he basically says, like, well, you guys are talking about stuff that costs money. But I think you talked about some of the themes of this. And I think this is why people like this movie, because it does have some universal themes to it. And one of them is you can't expect anything in your life to change if you don't change anything in your life. And I think specifically to this baseball team, Billy understands what we're doing is not working. He doesn't even tell those guys they're wrong necessarily, but it is what we're doing isn't working. We've got to do something else.
Yeah.
And in classic movie fashion, he meets the man of his dreams.
Yes, he does. He meets Jonah Hill, who plays Peter Brand. Who actually, it's funny because this Peter Brand is actually, it's a made up name for this character. It's actually based on a guy, Paul DePodesta, who didn't want to have his name used in the movie, but still was, I guess Bennett Miller said that he
did want his name used in this podcast.
Right. Yes. So we're going to say it as many times as we can. But Bennett Miller said that he was very helpful in helping the movie get made. But they respected that and changed his name to Peter Brand in this film. And Billy meets him when he goes to visit the Cleveland Indians to try to make some trades. And he notices that, none of these trades are working out. None of the things that he's offering are even being considered, because he sees Peter Brand kind of whispering to somebody who's relaying news. And then it's funny. He goes to his desk afterwards and asks him, who are you? What do you do? Like, what happened in there? And Jonah Hill I really love his performance in this. This is his first, he got nominated for Best Supporting Actor in this. I think it was his first nomination. And he's great. I love just kind of like how reserved he is and how like nervous he is at the beginning here. And also just even not wanting to tell Billy like his thoughts on using these statistics and his like systems that he's developed to analyze players. So he takes him out into the parking garage to like chat about this stuff as if it's like secret, like classified information. But I think that's kind of where Billy starts to see, maybe there's a different way that we could go about this.
And just to piggyback off what you said, yeah, Jonah Hill is unbelievable in this.
Mm-hmm.
And I love when this happens with actors. This role reflects Jonah Hill's career move in doing this film. And that's why I'm sure all his choices are deliberate, but he does seem very nervous in his scenes with Brad. I'm sure that's deliberate. Peter would have been nervous, but this idea of a person who, had their kind of feet in the water for this business for a while, but now you're moving up to the big leagues. And he was in the big leagues at the Indians, but he was, Billy makes him assistant GM or something.
Yeah.
To move him up to that. And so I love that. The same thing happened with the wrestler, with Mickey Rourke. Almost forgot his name. But just this idea of this person who had a high career and then kind of fell off, and they're trying to make a comeback. That's literally what the wrestler's about. And the idea of casting Mickey Rourke. So I love Jonah Hill in this. This certainly changed, this led to Wolf of Wall Street for him and some other stuff. Kind of like Jared Leto, I think he's kind of fallen in love with his own career since then. Yeah. It's a shame because it's just, God, he's good in this.
He's so good.
And I did want to just touch on, because I don't think we've talked about this yet, but the chemistry between him and Brad is amazing.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And I didn't really look into, I don't know if there's any information out there about how Jonah got this role. I'm sure I think Brad was kind of always tied to it, even when Soderbergh was going to direct this.
Yeah.
But I'm sure there were other people up for the role of Pete. And
it was actually when Soderbergh was in, I think it was Dimitri Martin was in consideration, right?
Yeah, that's what I saw.
Sorry if I cut you off.
No, you're right. It was Dimitri Martin. And actually, fun fact, Steven wanted to just cast the players as themselves. I would have vetoed that too.
It's funny because like I love Steven Soderbergh. I think he's definitely, he puts out more movies than most directors, so he's gonna have more hits and misses. But I love the chances that he takes and how he just makes the things he wants to make. And I've actually, I've worked, not to name drop, I've worked personally with him when I was working on Ocean's 8, and just like he's so collaborative and just open to ideas that I'll watch anything he does. But with this movie, I'm glad that it did not go for him, because I think we got something much more interesting.
You met Bennett too, didn't you?
I did meet Bennett when I was working on Ocean's 8. It's a very similar to your Wally Pfister story. I was just in my office, and I think we had a month or two left on the movie, and so people were coming in to see our offices to see like if their show wanted to take over our offices when we finished up. And our producer came by and introduced this guy to me. He's like, "Hey, this is Bennett. He's looking at these offices just to see, if he wants to take these over and stuff." I'm like, "Oh, cool." And the whole time I'm like, this guy looks really familiar. And I was chatting with him for like a minute or two, just about nothing important. And they're like, "All right, we'll see you later." And then he leaves. And about 2 minutes later, I was like, "Damn it, that was Bennett Miller." I just realized it. Like, I'm like, that's who that was. I was talking to him. And this was after I've seen Moneyball a million times. And so maybe it's good that I didn't recognize him, because I probably would have just started gushing about Moneyball and Foxcatcher and Capote.
You know what? I bet he doesn't get that a lot. He obviously has fans. He's a wonderful filmmaker. He's made some amazing movies. I did think it was interesting. He has not directed a movie since this.
Yeah, or since he did Foxcatcher after this, but
oh, that's right.
But that was still 10 years ago.
Yeah, that was a while. I know and now I forget what it was. He's working on some TV show now. He probably doesn't get that a lot. He's not like, I bet Christopher Nolan gets recognized a lot. But like people like Bennett, David Fincher, they don't probably get recognized a lot. So he probably would have appreciated it.
Definitely.
And I don't think this comes from ego, but man, people in the film business, they love talking about their work. And again, I don't think it's ego. I think it's that they love what they do so much. I think he would have loved to talk to you about Moneyball. We'll never know now.
Yeah, I know. I missed my chance. It would have been great.
So everyone's lesson for the day is Google this shit. So you know what these people look like while you hand them a Coke.
Oh man.
So anyway, we were talking about Jonah.
Yeah.
I had a question. So him and Brad after Jonah quietly steamrolls Billy's meeting with the Indians. Billy finds him in his cubicle and he talks to him about who are you, and he wonders who he is. But Pete's kind of cagey about talking about like this is why baseball's broken, and why the thinking isn't correct. But my question is, why did Pete tell Billy this? Why did he confide in Billy? Because I don't think there was anything in that first conversation. Billy didn't say, who are you? I'm trying to find something new, because he doesn't know that Peter knows.
Yeah.
That's true. This idea. So why does he help Billy?
I wonder if it's something like, he says, Billy's like, why does Mark Shapiro, the GM for the Indians, why does he listen to you? And Pete's like, you know what? I don't think he does a lot of the time. And he's like, well, he just did. And maybe it's something where Pete feels like I'm getting some of this information across, but I'm still like, nobody's totally listening to my ideas because they're so against the grain that he doesn't want to bring it up necessarily, but he also wants to bring it up to people. So maybe he's finally feeling like, okay, maybe I can confide in somebody to finally.
And they say this is his first job. So yeah, you're right. It's a knowing his place and not stepping on any toes.
Yeah. Yeah, but it is interesting to see him like give that information out to a competing team. It is strange.
Also, so later, Billy, like later that night or something, Billy calls Pete in the middle of the night to tell him he's working for the Oakland. When did they exchange numbers?
That's a good point too. He gets in the elevator and is just like gone. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good, maybe they exchanged on the way to the parking lot. Who knows?
I love Pete's arrival to the stadium. Is it called a stadium? Is it a ballpark? Do you call it a stadium in baseball?
Either one. Yeah, stadium, ballpark.
I don't know baseball. I don't know baseball, guys.
It's the Oakland Coliseum if you want to go proper on.
I'm not doing that. I know they all have names, don't they? But anyway, I love it. And I love that. So when we switch to him arriving, the first shot is of the barbed wire around the fence, and then it rack focuses to the posters of the three players that left at the end of the previous season. First of all, I love that imagery because the barbed wire to me says prison, and this idea that baseball is trapped in this old way of thinking. The arrival of Pete is the arrival of new baseball.
Yeah.
It's so that's why I think it looks like they're trapped, because literally as he walks in the door, those posters fall.
Yeah.
Like the arrival, because those guys were old news. And as Pete says in a previous scene, that basically Billy was good to get rid of them. So I love that. Yeah. The arrival of Pete is the arrival of new baseball. And I like the imagery. I love the imagery of that.
Yeah.
And just how he's going to change the game for them.
I love his arrival, and like, just, you start to see their chemistry just like take off like right away. just when Billy comes in, he's like, here's the player analysis that I've done for you. He's like, I asked you to do 3. He's like, how many did you do? He's like, 47. Actually, I did 51. I lied. I don't know why I just lied.
I don't know why. That nervous energy again is great.
Yeah. But it's funny because like it's that nervous energy, but then the comfortability definitely gets there by the end. And I think it's so well done.
This is an interesting role for Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah.
Who plays their
head coach.
I thought it was called, isn't it called something else in baseball?
I don't know. I thought he was the head coach, maybe.
He is, but but
it's something else.
Isn't it called something else? Anyway, he plays Art Howe.
Yeah.
But it's such an understated role for Phil Hoffman. Mm-hmm. He plays it well. Obviously, it's Philip Seymour Hoffman.
Yeah.
So but it's an interesting role for him because he usually plays these big characters and he's really good at that. And I almost wondered, I actually recently listened to a podcast, Jason Alexander's podcast, Really No Really, where they had Bryan Cranston on and they were just talking about acting and stuff. And Bryan was talking about how he, as an actor, and certainly it is good for your career to take roles for movies that you know are like, they're going to be good or they're people you wanted to work with because you don't know what'll happen. I forget what movie he was talking about in that podcast where he said that I want to say it was a Coen Brothers movie. Has he been in a Coen? But it was a one-day shoot. He's just a guy sitting behind a desk and it's one scene, a one-day shoot. And they tried to talk him out of it. He goes, no, I'll be there. Tell me what day and I'll show up. And he actually said he got a lot of work. He got a lot of recognition because he was in this movie from these big time directors. And I have to think that's why Phil Hoffman, I bet he took the role because I bet he read the script. Mm-hmm. And I bet he wanted to work with Bennett. And I think I have to think that's why he took it.
Yeah. So this it's actually, so he did Capote though with Bennett before this. So they had worked, but still, I mean, this is going from that lead role to this much less role. It's probably because he had such a great time with him before that and it probably was like a good career move as well, just to stay within that.
And where Phil Hoffman was in his career, I think it was just people want to work with people you like. So I think he's like, oh, come on, why not? And it probably wasn't that much. Probably wasn't a big commitment for him. It's like, I'll help you out with your movie.
It's pretty much every scene he's in, he's just standing there with his arms crossed, talking like he's bummed out. So
the whole most of Art Howe in this movie is that he is against it. He's sort of, even though Billy and Pete are recruiting guys that are they're statistically they're most likely to help the team, but they have to be used properly. And Art doesn't believe in that. Mm-hmm. So they're still losing at the beginning of the season because Art's not playing the team the way it's supposed to be played. Mm-hmm. I did read that I read something that said apparently Art, this is not accurate. Again, from a story standpoint, you need that friction, right? Mm-hmm. And I like the idea, obviously, and throughout the movie, we hear from other coaches, their old head scout, announcers you hear, sort of like condemning these guys, like what a dumb move to do this Moneyball thing. But from a story standpoint, it's nice that Billy has someone in his own house who's fighting him on it, and it's actually causing them to lose. But supposedly Art Howe was very supportive of this. Art was probably in the same mindset of Billy, like, we got to do something different, like, and I'll do anything. So again, I think from a story standpoint, it works very well. But supposedly Art Howe was all for it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. Also, like something that you brought up, that like hearing like the radio play throughout, people talking about like what their opinions are of what's happening in Oakland. I think that's so well done throughout the movie. Like there's so many scenes where it's just Billy in his truck listening to the radio of people just talk shit about what he's doing. And I think that's so well done. And that's another bias that I probably have because I grew up listening to Cleveland Indians talk radio with my dad in the car. Anytime we're in the car, it was like sports talk radio. It was talking about the Indians. So I definitely connected with that. And I think it's just such a good way to tell the story where we're not like just with the characters the whole time. We're getting outside perspectives of what people really think about what they're doing.
Well, I like you mentioned the radio stuff. I have to assume, except for a few, I have to assume a lot of that is real, old stuff. I love the use of game footage.
So well done.
And I wonder if that's a choice that came because actually there's a tiny bit, but there's very little game footage they filmed. You can tell a few key moments. And I wonder if that comes down to cost. I do know they said that they couldn't afford to travel to all these ballparks. So they just kept redressing the Oakland ballpark to look like other ones, except for Boston. They had one day in Boston. That's why it's raining in that scene because they're like, funny. You either shoot it or you don't. So it's raining. Yeah. But so I wonder if that was but I love the way they use it.
It's so well done.
It is. I love that during their winning streak, when they win their 20th game, and Hatterberg hits that home run. I love that as he's rounding third, they cut to the real footage.
I was going to say that's literally probably my favorite cut in the whole movie is just from that to that shot. I totally agree. And
it's funny because you it looks so good. And again, this is like I talked about it being crafted and everything is so deliberate. And I'm sure Chris Pratt, a fresh face Chris Pratt.
Yeah.
I think making his big league debut. I bet he memorized every motion that that Scott made as he went all the way around the bases, so they could cut it because it's a perfect cut. They did cut. I like
it's so good
from third to home. He's you can't quite see his face. They do that a lot.
They do it really good. They show faces of like guys who aren't recasted in the movie.
Yeah, or they're in the background. The non-speaking players. It's brilliant. And it's funny because I one of the criticisms I heard of this movie was that they talk a lot about one of the pitchers that throws funny. Their pitcher. But they said one of the things that led to their success was they had like 3 really good pitchers.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, I think that's deliberate for several reasons. But I think one of them is because they do show the other 2 pitchers actual footage of them. Mm-hmm. So I think that's why they do it. That's why the players are not the focus of this, which is also works for Billy's arc. Like Billy's not getting close to these guys, so neither are we. Yeah. I do think Scott Hatterberg, played by Chris Pratt, I think he's the representative of the team. Yeah. Because he was a catcher and because of injuries, he wasn't really playing, but they moved him to first base. So you have a guy, I think he represents the team because he plays, but he's being thrown into a new position, just like the team's being thrown into a new way of playing. He's being thrown in a position he's not comfortable with, and he has to learn how to do it. So I think Scott is just and that's why, and I know that's how it happened, but I bet they deliberately picked Scott because Scott he's that definitive moment when they won their 20th game.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so funny. I think any other, if you're going to make like another generic sports movie, you could totally make the Scott Hatterberg story of him being in the big leagues and losing, like his arm goes out, and then the movie ends on this home run on the 20-game win streak. And it's just his story, but it's not the focus. It's not the huge focus of this movie. It's a huge part of it, but I think it's more interesting to tell this Billy Beane story using Scott within it. Because you could totally make I'm sure you can make a good like just Scott Hatterberg movie, but I like that it's not the focus of the whole thing. But he's a good representation of what they're doing.
Well, I think a Scott Hatterberg movie is going to, and this is one thing I like about this movie. Again, we're changing up this old way of thinking about baseball. I think this movie, as a result, also changes up the way we do sports movies. I'm not saying it redefined the sports movie because I don't know how you don't recreate this, but the point is this movie takes a ton of sports movie tropes and either ignores them or makes fun of them. One of my favorite scenes is, I forget exactly where in the movie, but Billy goes into the locker room and he goes, you guys aren't a winning team, but you sure look like one. Fist bump. So go play like it, and walks out. And they're all sitting there like, what? Like, But the locker room, the famous locker room speech, they're just like, it's just shit. Like, it's so.
It's funny. And that plays into like, he doesn't want to get close to these guys. And there's moments of that throughout where it's just like funny, even like Chad Bradford, the pitcher who plays like on opening day, he talks to Billy in the locker room. He's like, thank you for this opportunity. And just, I'm going to be praying for you and your family. And Billy says, no problem. And walks out.
You too.
Yeah.
Take luck.
I love that. Like the awkwardness with the players.
But I think there is a point where I do think he doesn't want to get close to the players. And I think the success, when they start winning, there's moments that make me think he's starting to feel connect. And you know what it is? I think he's starting to fall in love with baseball again. Because as I said at the beginning, I think he hates baseball. I think he resents baseball because he loves baseball, but baseball just keeps kicking him. But I see that, and I think that's where the funny locker room speech comes from. Hey, why don't I say something to know these guys, so these guys know that I've got their back and I'm supportive. And he's bad at it because he's never done it before. And I think that he starts. Wait, does he start traveling with the team? I don't think he ever does that.
No, but he definitely gets closer. Like, there's definitely those montages where he's kind of like talking. Him and Pete are talking to players specifically, like about what their new approach and process is. And that's where you start to see him actually interacting with these guys. And then you get to a point where he's walking through the locker room, talking to guys individually, either telling them like, oh, you couldn't hit that shit with a paddle or something last night, or like good hitting. And he's starting to get more comfortable with it and wanting to connect with these guys, I think.
Yeah, that was a big one that you mentioned. Though there's like a oneer after, it's right after their 7 win. They win those 7 games in a row. There's a oneer, like it's a single shot with no cuts. It's a oneer where he walks through the locker room and he's like shooting the shit with them, like half a dozen guys. And I do love the irony that it was something so mathematical, so calculated, that caused Billy to want to start connecting emotionally with his players. I think that's really interesting. So you were talking about Billy. There's like a sort of a montage where Billy is explaining to players and how this strategy works, and like, this is what we have to do. We're not bunting. We're not stealing. We're not doing that. Like, this is our strategy now. First of all, I think Billy could have saved himself a lot of time by just talking to the whole team about this in the locker room rather than like 3 cinematically pleasing locations.
Very true.
I do like, and I think it's right after he does that sequence where, he's talking to the players and they're all kind of get it. They're starting to get it. Okay. But he goes to talk to DJ, and DJ's in the net. He's practicing his baseball hitting. I don't know baseball. And but I like this idea. I like the imagery. Billy's actually trying to connect with him, but the shot. So it's 2 shots going back and forth. One of Billy, one of DJ. But the one of Billy, I think it's interesting. You could see the net in front of him. It's sort of this barrier. He's still got this barrier up because the shot of DJ, the net's out of focus. So I just thought that was interesting that, there's still kind of this wall up. Billy's still maybe trying to sort of have this distance between himself and his players.
I like that too. It's also that moment where you kind of see, DJ he's kind of the older player. He wants him to be kind of the more role model leader in the locker room. So he really wants him to understand what he's trying to do. Cause he's trying to, he says like, milk the last bit of baseball out of you. And it's just basically, can we help each other out? Can you like be a leader to these guys? And he points out the funny thing. He's like, what, you think you're special? He's like, yeah, you're paying me $7 million. So maybe I am. He's like, oh no, man, the Yankees are paying half your salary. They're paying you $3.5 million to play against them. And I think that's kind of a moment where he's like, oh yeah, that's a good point. And it's a good connection where they kind of get on the same page.
And I like that scene because it again, if I think if you think of this old way of thinking of baseball, you might have had a star player. We're not star players. It's a cliche, but this is a they're a team. If they're not working equally as a team, they're not going to succeed. This is never going to work. So yeah, I like that, and I like that it wasn't a speech. It's not a speech about, well, you're part of a team and we're a family here. That wasn't it. It's, guess what? Some other team is paying $500,000 or half of your salary for me to babysit you. That's what they're doing, because they don't give a shit about you. And I like that. And, kind of that ego check. One thing we kind of glazed over, which is actually perfect because I don't know that I agree. I don't like this. Billy's daughter.
Yeah.
So, first of all, he's poor. Billy wears a wedding ring, but he's kind of portrayed as this like loner divorcee. Suppose around this time, I guess Billy was remarried.
Yeah,
but he did have a daughter with his first wife. So I feel like a big part of him staying, and again, this is not. I understand why the man Billy Beane would have done this, but as far as what the story was trying to tell us. If we can fast forward to the end, I don't buy for a second that the Billy Beane we saw would turn down Boston for his daughter. Because if his daughter is so important, is such like this emotional core of his arc, why don't we get introduced to her until like 45 minutes into this movie?
That's a fair point.
I felt like that might have been more of the movie that maybe got cut.
Yeah.
But yeah, we don't even know he has a daughter until he has this meeting with Scott, because Scott goes, "Do you have any kids?" He goes, "Yeah, I got a daughter."
Yeah.
So
that's very true.
Yeah. So that's one thing in this movie that like bothers me is it feels almost tacked on.
That's fair. I think it's interesting too, because it does feel a bit of not an afterthought, but even with him getting, he wears a wedding ring, like you said, he's remarried. We never see his wife, but there's a deleted scene where he's having dinner with her. I think it's after the 20-game win streak. And he's basically having the same conversation that he has with Pete after the 20-game win streak. And it's interesting to be like, I'm glad that was cut, because I think that would be so strange to introduce his wife at that point in the movie, which would have been like almost 3/4 of the way through.
Yeah.
And maybe there were more scenes that they cut from shooting earlier on, but that's one scene where it's like, that makes sense to not have that, because that would have made things really strange. And they did, and maybe there was more with the daughter earlier on, which might have helped that story a little bit more. Because we don't see a lot of her. We see like a few scenes when she comes to visit.
And there's no indication that he's a bad father. There's no indication that any of the decisions he makes throughout this film are in service of him trying to be a better father.
Right.
But I feel like at the very end of this movie, they're like, by the way, he loves his daughter, so he's not going to go. Like, wait, what? I thought this movie was about baseball. So I don't buy. I think they want, and the only reason I can think they might have left it in is, I don't know, maybe to humanize Billy. I almost wonder if it's. I've heard Aaron Sorkin talk about how studios love they really want a love story because they say audiences, that's all audiences want. That's debatable. But I wonder if this was his love story. If Aaron thought this is my love story in this movie is how much he loves his daughter. But yeah, I just didn't. I think the interesting thing about doing films about dramatizing historical events is you have to find those notes, those story notes. And I just don't think they found it with this whole arc with his daughter. But again, she's in like 3 scenes. Yeah.
I think what I connected to more than his daughter is just the song that I think maybe it was just to get to the song choice that they put at the end and the lyrics within that song of like, Billy has not been able to, like you said, he hates baseball. He seems to hate baseball. He's resentful. And it's been so long since he's been able to just sit back and enjoy the show and just actually have fun with it. And maybe it's that song that kind of tells us, yeah, he could go to Boston and take all the money, but what is that going to get him? And, he says he made one decision in his life based on money and he's not going to do it again. So maybe it's that song. Maybe it's all just to lead to that song. Maybe I'm a half-ass way to get there, but to get to that song where he can finally maybe just enjoy what he's doing and know that the changes that he's made have actually in some way changed the game. Because that's by the end, that's what he wants to do. He wants to have changed the game. He wants to have made what they did matter. And in reality, like a lot of teams started to adopt this kind of process, but it still wasn't like a huge thing that took off that the movie necessarily portrays. But I think it just shows that he actually did succeed. And, there's like the metaphor of the guy hitting the home run at the end that Jonah Hill just put so on the nose. So maybe the whole point of this daughter story was just to get to that song so that he could listen to it, which seems a convoluted way to get there.
It just, yeah, like we said, it feels a little tacked on. It's interesting. And this movie is not trying to, by no means is this movie trying to say, well, athletes are people and we should love them like children. But I do think it's interesting. You could almost draw from this. It's like, well, at the beginning of the movie when the scouts are talking about like, well, we don't want this guy because he's ugly or he's got an ugly girlfriend or all these superficial reasons they don't want to pick up these players. But the funny thing is Moneyball's a new way of thinking. But to me, in some ways, it's almost it's the same. They're still being treated like commodities, these players. Yeah. Instead of either hiring them or not hiring them because of superficial reasons, we're doing it literally based on numbers. We're boiling these guys down to numbers. I just think it's interesting. And I'm not trying to dump on pro sports for this by any means, but it is interesting that like, this is what a player, it's kind of interesting how the movie itself almost dehumanizes players. You guys are assets. They're almost not employees. You're just assets. And that's why, and I do like the juxtaposition of like, there's the scene that I cannot follow, but it's where Billy and Pete are like playing phone tag with all these guys. And I think what happens in that scene is, do they trade some people to get money to buy another player? Is that what happens in that scene?
In that scene, there's a lot of fist
pumps, but I don't know what happens.
Pumps, a lot of phone calls. So earlier in the movie, when he's in Cleveland, he's trying to get Ricardo Rincon from Cleveland, who's a relief pitcher. And it kind of gets to the point where he's like, later in the movie, in this scene, he's like, I really want to get Rincon because Cleveland's season is done. They're not going to need him. They could do with whatever. But then he knows that San Francisco is also wanting to get Rincon. So he calls San Francisco to try to give them an option where they kind of cool down on wanting Rincon. And then he's kind of calling teams back and forth. And then by the end, what he does is gets Cleveland to agree to it. And Billy's actually going to pay $250,000 of his own money because that's who Jonah Hill's on the phone with, is the owner of the team. And he's like, he needs $250,000 for Ricardo Rincon. And the owner says no. And he's like, Billy will pay it out of his own pocket, but then he gets to keep the money that he makes back when he trades Rincon next season. So it is a very complicated scene of phone tag.
And it's really just it's the names being thrown around the teams. So it's funny. You said it's Rincon, Ricardo Rincon. I completely forgot that was the guy from the beginning. No idea. But again, I almost think that's deliberate. I don't know who these guys are because they're commodities. They're not people. And in the context of this movie, they're not people. They're just they're numbers for me. They're stats on a sheet, and so probably deliberate. Yeah,
there's actually, and even in that scene, there's a point when Billy's on the phone. They're talking about player Anderson, and then he talks to somebody else on the phone. He's like, they're gonna give me Michelson, and Jonah Hill corrects him. He's like, Anderson. He's like, oh, Anderson. It's like he's not even.
See, I don't even know his name.
He doesn't even know. But that's actually, so I read the Moneyball book. Finally, I'd never read it until recently. And that Rincon deal was actually like pretty as it went. They were in a series with playing against Cleveland, and they made the trade, and literally he just comes to their locker room, and now he's on Oakland like that night.
Huh.
So it's pretty funny.
Changes clothes, he's on his way. But then,
Yeah.
So they're celebrating because they got this player, but then the fact that they have to go down to, I think it's one of their catchers.
Yeah, I think it's
And
him or
yeah, and he's like, well, I gotta send somebody down, and do you, and I know I've heard this before. So you got the major leagues, but then you've got it's minor leagues, and then there's like, is it called AA, AAA? What's it called?
Yeah, so minor league has a single A, AA, AAA, kind of the levels to get to. So I think at that point they're sending him down. I don't know if they're cutting him or sending him down to AAA.
I thought they said he's like, well, if we want to pay for Ricardo, we got to send somebody down.
Yeah, right. That's true. Yeah.
So I assume you still get paid. Do you still get paid at that level?
Mm-hmm.
You're still considered a professional, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, I like that they're celebrating this deal they made, but then to go down and this guy's getting dressed and he's like, we've been working on stuff. I'm like, really like, this is a guy who knows he's not doing a good job, but he's trying to do better. And he's heartbroken. I'm glad that's not a very emotional, like he's not crying. Like that's, but I like that he, I like that then we immediately go down and actually there's something about Billy just saying, I need you to stop getting dressed. Like what a dagger.
Yeah.
There's something about that. Like just don't. No, but I like that. I do like that juxtaposition. Like I said, like I do think there's an attempt to at least at some points remind the audience that these are real people they're trading. I think that's important. But also understanding that to these guys, to all these managers and stuff, these guys are just they're assets. Their equipment and stuff like that.
There's one thing I want to point out that I don't want to lose. This is a silly point and also a very serious point.
They do lose, Josh. I'm sorry.
They do.
They do.
But this is silly, but I also kind of think it's important, at least for my viewing. I think this might be one of the best eating performances we've ever had in a movie.
From the great Brad Pitt.
From that man, I could watch that man eat anything. And he's done it before. He's, I think going back to like Ocean's 11, the first time we see him, he's standing outside his car in his cool suit, just eating something. I forget what, but burrito or something.
He's famous for that.
Yeah.
Eating in all his movies. And it's so, you know what? And it's probably because I know like it's a big joke. I think the story I heard from Ocean's 11 even, because that's where it like became famous. Like this guy's eating was it Soderbergh? Didn't know where he was getting this food. He would like hide snacks on set and they go to roll and he's just like eating chips and Steven's like, where the fuck did he get those? Like,
that's so good.
Know what? He's eating in almost every goddamn scene. It's distracting.
It really is. I love it. Cause it's like, it kind of, to me, it like shows like not necessarily who this guy is, but it adds some interesting dynamics to at least the scene. I made a list of like I was watching them, like stuff that he either eats or spits out when he's either spitting out sunflower seeds or his dip spit, or even like when he's writing names on the little cards, he like pulls the cap off with the dry erase marker and spits it out. And he's just always eating stuff. I think my favorite is right before he goes down to tell Giambi that he's traded is he puts a Twinkie down in 2 bites. And
it's all home. He talks through it. Or I think that's the scene with the Ricardo deal where he takes a fistful of popcorn, smashes it into his. I swear some of that went up his nose.
Yeah,
and
out of a coffee filter.
Yeah, and then and then the phone rings. He spits it all out. Yeah, and I also like even at the beginning when he's in the office of the Indians. And it's funny because he's obviously getting frustrated. And I don't know what the really Billy Bean is like. But of course, Brad Pitt adds this like just sort of like chill attitude to it. The fact that even though he's just getting crucified by these guys in this office, he's comfortable. He eats like their whole bucket of peanuts just
right off of his desk.
Just like starts taking fistfuls of them. And it's just like, you got to think there's probably a balance on his movies of like, okay, well, he probably wants a bucket of peanuts on this guy's desk so he can just sit there. And it's funny. I did, and I've heard this a couple of places, but I listened to some of the Office Ladies podcast, and they've talked about eating in scenes and that actors generally hate it. And it's fun to watch for this now because what happens is whatever you want to be careful, because you do have to eat in the scene, but you want to be careful how much you eat. And you want to eat as little as possible because for continuity, you need to eat that all fucking day.
Yeah.
And that food will be stone cold. By the time you're done, it's going to be congealing. So it's funny. It's funny if you watch movies and TV, how many actors will like sit there and futz with food. You can see they're like futzing with food on their fork because they don't want to eat it. And Brad Pitt that's his lunch. Like he's just like that guy ate, like honestly, in that popcorn scene, that guy probably ate 24 fistfuls of pop. Well, I guess he didn't. He spit them all out.
Yeah.
But the peanuts in the Indians' office, like just fistfuls. They probably had to refill that bucket. I don't think it's not actually a bucket, but it's a big fucking container of nuts, and he's just eating all of it.
That's so true. And I will say that a big thing about baseball culture is eating sunflower seeds. That's a big thing that players do.
Yes.
He's good at it, I gotta say.
That's the only reason he signed on.
He's got the good. I mean, he loads them in his cheek, and you can see him pulling them over with his teeth and spitting them out. And he's got good speed on eating those seeds. I will say.
Probably. He had probably a seed coach, dialect coach, seed coach. Actually, speaking of the personality of the real Billy Bean, this movie is 10% Billy breaking shit.
Yeah.
It's just one at like he's breaking bats when he's a player. He's throwing chairs against walls and he's flipping desks. And this movie is and when they win, or I'm sorry, when the team loses early on, he goes in the locker room, he breaks the stereo with a bat, and then there's that sign. That is a really good scene, but the silence, and he goes, "That's what losing sounds like." Mm-hmm. That's great. But then, like as he's walking out, he just picks up the cart with the Gatorade jug thing on it and throws it. Like 10% Billy. I actually, on my first viewing of this, I wrote down this movie is 10% men breaking things, and then on my second viewing, I was like, no, it's 10% Billy breaking stuff. He's the only one breaking anything. That's
true.
So they win 7 games in a row because they're kind of starting to get the hang of Moneyball. And then the movie kind of has this great montage of them winning games 8 through 19. And at that point, what was it, in the 50s? I forget which team. They say what team won 19 games in a row.
Yeah, it's really cool, like talking about like the game footage. Like they even go back to like Babe Ruth and like, you know, that time they have footage from like all of these teams that were, you know, having streaks, and talking about how like Babe Ruth and his team, like they didn't even win. They won 9 games in a row and they're like considered one of the best teams ever. It's really cool to see the archival footage of all of these teams as like a historical thing. I think it's really well done in this montage.
Yeah. And I think, and I'm going to bring up his name because I'm not familiar with this editor. There's such a momentum to that. And you have to give credit to the editor because I'm sure that went through a lot of iterations, but that kind of sequence, and there's so many assets to pull in. So many assets. Yeah. And Christopher Tellefson, who's actually had a decent career. He edited The Menu, A Quiet Place.
Oh, cool.
This, like he's had quite a career. Assassin's Creed, well, you know. Yeah, we all make mistakes. No, but that's still a high profile movie. Like this guy, I'm sure the editing was not the problem of Assassin's Creed.
No.
But that sequence is such a great example of just good editing. It's got a good rhythm to it. And again, as someone who's not a big baseball fan, I don't know who these teams are, but since it's a lot of archival footage with a few things they would have shot sprinkled in, it takes an editor to be able to take archival footage, archival dialogue, and string it together, something that were never intended for this purpose. And to be able to cut all that together in something that cohesive and that has this great energy to it, that doesn't just happen. It takes someone very talented. And I can't even imagine the pile of the mountain of footage and audio that Chris would have had to go through to pull that together.
Yeah.
I bet this sequence took forever, but it's phenomenal, and just moving things in and out, and it's incredible. It's absolutely, and the whole movie's edited very well, but yes, shout out to that part. So the game that is to be their 20th win, which would set the record for most games won in a row.
Yeah.
I love it because it's the perfect example of, I would say, journalism over storytelling, which I only want to bring up because the work I do now is like commercial work, and I and a lot of what I've done is actually like high school sports.
Yeah.
And sometimes I do videos about games that happen, big accomplishments teams had, and sometimes it's not sports; it's still stories. But the point is, journalism is, to me, is like it's stating facts. It's a historical notes about it, and I'm not trying to discount that journalism is important, but that's what it is. It's these are these things as they happened. Storytelling is about engaging an audience in the sense that, like, this game is a perfect example. If you know anything about the A's, if you know anything about baseball, if you know anything about this streak, you know they won. They won their 20th game. This sequence, and even me, the second time watching this movie, I know they won, but this is put together in a way that even the second time I watched it, they have an 11-point lead in the whatever.
Yeah, in the third or fourth inning.
They have an 11-point lead, and they start to lose it. And even the second time I watched this, they start to lose it. I went, oh shit, thinking, because I thought they were going to lose it.
Yeah.
And when Hatterberg goes up and he hits the homer, they all stand up and scream, and you kind of want to do it yourself. Because that's it. Even though, if you're watching the movie, you know this, and you know this happens, or if you are familiar with baseball and you know this happened, what a great example of how a story is powerful enough to engage you emotionally. And, great storytelling, they say, is about the journey and not the destination. And when the journey is that good, I can watch this multiple times and still just clench up when they start losing that lead. Like, oh my God, this is going to be the one. I mean, I know I've seen this before, but maybe they did lose. I don't remember.
And it's so funny, like reading the book, how true pretty much everything that happens. I mean, that's exactly how the game went down. And Billy was on his way to see their minor league team because he didn't want to be there to watch whether they won or not. And then he turns around and he comes and he's in the locker room watching the game. And
because he didn't watch the game, and his daughter said, "Don't, you're not going to jinx them." Yeah. And it was when he went, and I maybe this, when he went back, is that when they started to lose? Did he get back there? And what a great, this is a good example too of meshing story and plot. The plot is about the team winning, so they can start winning. And specifically in this moment, the plot is about, but the story is about Billy and Billy's sort of redemption in the eyes of baseball, according to him. Yeah. We never get the sense that people think he's bad. I mean, obviously he's criticized for this, and so that moment, that game, and how it, like, he comes back and he starts watching and they start losing, he blames himself. That's so well done. But it's the fact when Hatterberg goes up and they cut, I don't remember where Billy is specifically, in the locker room or something, but he's got his head down and Hatterberg hits the ball and it's just cut well. He looks up and during this moment when they're losing, they start cutting back to to Billy's playing career and all his failures. And he's just thinking, like, it's just well done. It's all just, he's piling it on himself.
Yeah.
That this is the culmination of all my failures. And this is my greatest one. And I took this big swing and I'm going to fail again. And just that sound of the ball being hit. This did get nominated for Best Sound Design.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, this sequence alone is so well done. I love what they do, playing with silence and with, just the baseball sounds. I think it's so effective. And I mean, the whole movie has it, but this specifically.
And it didn't win the Oscar. I don't know who won that year, but typically the nominees and the winners for sound design are more big budget stuff, which, credit where it's due. That stuff you have to make a lot of sound effects for CG characters. So, but yeah, the fact that this was just noticed for being a having great sound design was wonderful. So yeah, that whole moment was great.
Yeah, I love that. And it's actually I think this sequence has maybe my favorite shot in the movie, and it's used kind of a couple times. It's when Hatterberg is coming up to the plate, and it's behind home plate looking up kind of at the whole field and the whole Coliseum. It's so beautiful. It looks huge, just like the gigantic stadium. I think there's something about like being in a stadium to me that just feels so epic, and seeing that shot and being like that low to the ground and seeing how like big this is and how big of a moment this is for him is so effective.
I also like how this scene closes out very well the Art Howe arc.
Yes.
So he's fighting Billy, and there is a great scene earlier in the movie where, because Howe keeps playing the players he wants to play, and Billy's like, that's not how this is supposed to work. He won't play Hatterberg specifically, right? Is one of them. And so all the players he's playing, there's a great sequence where all the players that Art Howe is playing, Billy trades them.
Yeah.
And there's actually, if we could just jump back to that really quick, there is a scene, part of that is they're in a room with Pete, Billy, Art, and they call in, is it Jeremy Jombie? Jeremy Jombie, and he tells him, you're being traded to whoever, and he gets up and walks out of the room, and then Billy looks at him, he goes, Jeremy's gone too. Like, fantastic. A gun that just so really sharp. And again, it's a joke that comes out of nowhere, and you're like, that's fucking awesome.
I love that.
But I love in that sequence, and you may know better than I would, I don't know why Art decides to have Hatterberg hit for someone else, but I love the idea from a storytelling standpoint is that Art is forced into, and again, if Scott represents the team, then Art saying, we got one last shot, Scott, I want you to do it.
Yeah.
That's Art saying, okay, I believe in what this team is doing.
Exactly. Yeah. I think they reinforce it. I had the same exact thought, and I see it as Art finally being like, okay. And I know the whole like Moneyball thing, there's more to it, but they kind of boil it down to him and Pete. Like, he gets on base. That's the thing that we want. If he gets on base, we can get more runs because we'll get our players around. And I see this as Art being like, okay, it's true. Hatterberg gets on base. We need somebody to get on base because we need to score a run here.
Yeah.
And it's him finally being like, okay, maybe this is right. Maybe this is our best chance here. And it's even reinforced in the audio of like the game announcers being like, Hatterberg coming to the plate. He gets a lot of walks. It seems like they want to get a base runner. Maybe they'll get somebody in to pinch run for him. And it's them like saying like, okay, it's even the announcers who have been kind of shitting on this whole thing. And talk radio people finally be like, hey, this guy gets on base. So maybe this is a good decision. So it's a way of seeing like Art Howe kind of coming around in a way. And also even more people maybe that we've heard shitting on his plan.
Yeah. And the fact that he hits the home run, and obviously we're well aware that's actually what happened, but the fact that he hits the home run is a great lead into what follows from this win is that there's things about baseball you can't predict. You know, percentages do only go so far. Yeah, we put him in because he was most likely to get on base.
Yeah.
Nobody expected him to hit a home run. And so that was great. It's great how that, how that works into kind of the idea of the story, and they do move sort of into that there are, and that's it. Again, I've talked to people who kind of don't love this movie because they say, well, there's a lot more going on about Moneyball.
Sure.
And even the fact that there's been kind of ideas that Moneyball, this strategy, it doesn't work as well as maybe the movie portrays it to be because there were other factors. But it's worth pointing out the movie is called Moneyball. It's about Moneyball.
Yeah.
They never go and say, they never specifically say, well, this is the only reason we won. If the movie had done that, that would be a different story, but they never specifically said it, but the focus is on Moneyball. And they probably put some of those other factors in the movie, but again, cut it out, cut it down. It's kind of like actually, if I can go on a tangent, recently with Oppenheimer, I've heard some people criticizing that, well, why didn't you show any of Japan? Why didn't you show any of the bombs being dropped because the movie's called Oppenheimer.
Mm-hmm.
The movie's about him. It's not about the war specifically. It's about Oppenheimer. So, and that's again, this movie is about Moneyball. And honestly, there's a 4-hour version of this movie where they touch on everything, I'm sure. But they didn't. So
yeah, I think it's really interesting because this sequence is done so well. And then I think it's really funny right after this, you see Billy kind of celebrating in his own way in the locker room. Like he gives a little fist pump, but even that is a little restrained.
He allows himself to enjoy it. Mm-hmm.
He finally does for a moment when he's alone, but even then he's not ecstatic. He's still reserved a little bit because he's like, this only gets us so far. This isn't the full thing. And a scene right after that with Pete where he's like, hey man, we won 20 games. So what? He's like, if we lose the last game of the season, nobody gives a shit, and they'll dismiss us. And everything that we've done here is like for nothing, basically. And it's so funny right after this, we go right to the American League Division Series elimination game, which they were in the year prior, this time playing the Minnesota Twins. And I think it's so funny that this is a moment in the sports movie where it's like, okay, they did the 20-game win streak. Now they're in the elimination game. They're going to win it, right? It's going to happen. And then it shows one pitch and he flies out and they lose and the season's over. It's such a deflating moment for everything that we've built up so far and just for Billy that I think it's kind of funny that it's like it happens so quickly.
And I love that. I think that's a bold choice.
Yeah.
Like literally it opens with, it's a shot of the stadium.
Mm-hmm.
And then it cuts to whoever's batting. It might be DJ is batting, walking up to base. And the text comes on bottom of the ninth. Oh, we're done.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's it. They lose. But I love it. And I think that does reinforce what Billy says. It's kind of this idea of, you're most remembered for the last thing you did.
Mm-hmm.
So we just won 20 games and we have all this weight in the film of these 20 game. We feel these 20 wins in a row.
Yeah.
But yeah, in an instant it was gone because like Billy said, if we lose this, no one cares. And that kind of, and the way that's put together reinforces that because, that's it. I do absolutely love once they lose, they do this slow pan and there's like the Minnesota team celebrating and the Oakland players slowly does like pan out and then the lights go out. I love that.
Good.
And then I think it cuts to Billy, right?
Yeah. And that whole shot is like coupled with the guy talking about like, this just shows that the Oakland A's were not a sound baseball team. What they were trying to do basically didn't work. And it's exactly what Billy said in the previous scene, that they'll be dismissed if they lose it. And I think that paired with that shot is so effective.
And it does. And that dialogue reinforces this idea of it's supposed to be like the baseball world kind of exhaling, like, oh, thank God he was wrong. Like, what the fuck are we going to do if he was right?
Yeah.
And so I do. Yeah. I like that the baseball world collectively went, oh, thank God this didn't work. In the long run, it didn't work. It didn't win him a World Series and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So we were talking about the scene prior to that when Billy says, if we don't win the last game, we'll be forgotten. But I like they say, what does Billy want? Billy wants to change the game.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what he wants. And so they lose, and then he takes his meeting. He gets a phone call from Boston, and he goes to meet with Boston. And I love that scene between, I don't know, is that an actor? Whoever the
I don't know, actually.
Owner of the Red Sox is supposed to be.
Yeah.
I love that
great.
scene. Actually, it's funny because we said earlier that was shot in a day. They had very little time to film that, and that's why it's in the rain and all that.
Yeah.
Something to me is off about the audio in that. Like it had to be now again, it was raining. Maybe the rain was screwing up the audio. If you listen closely, the audio is off.
Oh, that's interesting.
It sounds weird to me, almost like they had to kind of do a low pass or a high pass to kind of maybe cut out, try and get rid of some of the sound of the rain or something.
Yeah.
But I do like the sound. I love, I do love that guy that plays like the owner of the Red Sox. I think he does an incredible job.
He kind of runs that whole scene. Like Billy barely says anything in that scene.
Yeah. I like that. I like but I love what he said. He has a line and he says the first one through the wall gets bloodied.
Yep.
And I like the idea that he, Billy, because Billy took a thrashing, and even when it worked, people didn't believe it. And again, when they lost that last game of the season, it was, oh, thank God he was wrong the whole time. But I like this. I like this idea of someone noticed, someone at a very high place noticed, and again noted, and he tells him, he says, every general manager is rethinking baseball right now.
Yeah. And if they don't, they're dinosaurs. They're going to be sitting on the couch watching the Red Sox win the World Series.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's like, and he's it's basically like him giving a speech to Billy, telling him what he actually did. And it's Billy finally hearing it from somebody else that's outside of the organization, that he did something that changed minds throughout the league. And it's how it's threatening scouts' jobs, and how, money gives them the opportunity to not care about what baseball thinks and what other people think. And this is the owner trying to get Billy to, come to Boston as well. Kind of encouraging him to make that leap. But yeah, it's Billy hearing everything that he's been working for, and how what he done has actually changed the game in a way.
And it's funny because he gets an offer from Boston. We don't know what it is. We don't find out until right before the credits roll.
Yeah.
But he gets an offer from Boston, and he goes back, and it's interesting because he says he wants to change the game. You have the head of the Boston Red Sox telling you change the game. He has Pete in the very next scene telling him that you changed the game. He doesn't believe it.
Yeah.
He just can't be convinced of it. I do love a moment in that scene with him and Pete. And you brought up the big catcher whose name I did write down, Jerry Brown. We'll come back to that because I do want to talk about that. But Billy says, I don't want to take this just for the money, and Pete says, you're not taking it for the money. You're taking it for what the money represents. That you're worth it. And I think I love that message. I think that's such an important message. I know you and I, and this is true of a lot of things, but you and I do creative work for a living. You're in the industry. You're in the film and television industry. I'm not. I work for myself, but there's this idea from people sometimes that, well, if you love what you do, if you do something creative that you enjoy, you should do it for free or next to nothing.
Right.
And that value. I actually heard a story once about a graphic designer, and I don't remember who this was, or what company this was, but this company brought in a graphic designer. Let's say for the sake of story, it was not Nike, but let's just say for the sake of the story, It was Nike. So they brought in like a graphic designer and said, we're looking for a new logo. And the designer says, it'll be $50,000 for me to design this logo for you. And they say, okay. And as they're talking, the head of this company and the designer takes a Post-it note and a pen from this guy's desk, and he draws like something simple, the Nike swoosh, let's just say. And he shows it to the CEO, and he goes, that's perfect. That's exactly what it is. He goes, but you expect us to pay you $50,000 for something you just spent 10 seconds drawing? And they said, you're paying for everything that got me to the point that I can do that. And I do think, just in a lot of things we do as we work, but certainly creative work and stuff like this, people should really understand what their value is and never discredit it. We've talked before that you and I are from the Midwest. We don't want to cause a fuss. And I think there is a mentality sometimes with people around here as well. We shouldn't get paid a lot to do things because, that's just being greedy. No, because you're worth it. I think people should have that value. So I love that Pete says that. I love that Pete makes a strong case for Billy that you're not doing it for the money, but you deserve the money. Also, let's be honest, if Billy takes a job in Boston, Pete's moving up to general manager.
That's I was going to say that. That's the true. I don't know if you researched the true story of this.
No.
But the true story, and actually there's a deleted scene in the movie, not in the movie, but that they shot where the true story was Billy verbally accepted the Red Sox offer. For 2 days, he didn't sign a contract. And for 2 days the Oakland assumed, okay, he's going to Boston, and Paul DePodesta was going to move up and be the general manager.
Okay.
And there's a deleted scene where they find this out and they tell Pete, and and to like settle like their contracts and things, Pete negotiates to have Kevin Youkilis from Boston come to Oakland, who in the movie Pete says, he's like, this guy's my hero, Kevin Youkilis. He gets walked more than anybody. He's the Greek god of walks. And the true story was they did make that negotiation. And for 2 days, they assumed he was going to Boston and Pete was going to be the GM. And then he declined the offer. So, but I'm glad that they didn't put that in there, because it kind of feels like a bit of like a dick move to accept that and then have Pete be moved up. And then he's like, you know what? No, I'm not going to do that.
It becomes a little dicey. And again, as we've talked, there's a lot of things in this movie. And this is credit to what storytelling is. It's focused on what it is. This is about Moneyball. This is Billy Beane's story about Moneyball. And so again, like we talked, Moneyball was not the only thing that led to the team's success. And yeah, there's a lot of factors in play here, just like in the real world. But and I think, that was a choice. I'm surprised they even shot that. Yeah. Because you would think they would have said, no, this is Billy's story. Let's keep it about him. I do want to talk about, because Pete pulls Billy as Billy's struggling with that decision. And there's his name's Jeremy Brown. Who's it? What do you know? What team was he on?
It was one of Oakland's minor league teams. I can't remember which one, but he was one of their minor league players. And the book kind of goes more in depth on this. It's actually at the end of the book as well, this story.
And he talks, he's like a 230-ish pound catcher, and he wants to go. His job is to get on first. And he hits and he runs, and for some reason he decides today's the day I'm going to try to get to second. And he rounds and he falls and he crawls back, and he says how this is all of Jeremy's nightmares coming true. And they're all laughing at him. And Pete says, and you're about to find out why. He hits a home run and has no idea. Yeah. And he gets up and he jogs around, and they're all high-fiving him and stuff. And it's beautiful. It is an absolutely wonderful thing. First of all, I love an entire, I gotta think this was deliberate. It's a movie about numbers, right? And you have Billy, who keeps his distance from his players. It's not a lot of feelings. Yeah. But I cried during this scene, and I think that's deliberate. Like, let's have this. And even Billy says it's hard not to be romantic about baseball, because that's it. And again, numbers couldn't account for that. Stats couldn't account for him doing that. And even Jeremy Brown knows his own stats, and he couldn't account for that. It's beautiful. I do love that it ends, and Pete goes, "It's a metaphor." It's like, I get it. And I did want to highlight that line because I heard Aaron Sorkin talk once about how if you're going to do something kind of silly like that, kind of obvious, call yourself out. Yeah. Like it is. And I do like that it is a way to explain kind of the theme of the movie without directly explaining, because sometimes characters will literally just say the theme of the movie, but also it's a little on the nose. So that's good writing for Aaron, or maybe Steve did, I don't know, but Aaron to put in the script, have Pete call out this heavy-handed metaphor. That's good writing. If you're going to do something silly, I think an example he gave was like, he was reading some like aspiring screenwriter script, and it opened with like a single guy defusing a bomb in like a major metropolitan area, and Aaron asked the guys like, well, wouldn't a whole team be on that? He goes, then call it out, have him say over the radio, why am I the only one here? So I thought of that when I was like, call it out.
That's funny. That's so true. It's such a heavy-handed thing, and no, I think it's a perfect way to end it, and just like, encapsulates everything that Billy had done there, at least within this story. Maybe in real baseball, it didn't make that much of a change. It definitely started the conversation more, but like within this story, it showed it accomplished what it wanted to.
Yeah. And they, afterwards, I always love it. I love when movies based on true stories do this, but they kind of show some text afterwards thing. So Billy turned down $12.5 million from the Red Sox. But 2 years later, the Red Sox won their first World Series since 1918.
Yeah.
Using the Moneyball method. It is worth pointing out, while they may have adopted that, the Red Sox were still a team that could afford to buy the best players.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's what I was going to bring up. It's like, that part's left out. They adopted that to definitely fill out their roster, but they're a team that had a ton of money and had superstars. I mean, they had Johnny Damon from Oakland in center field, and that team was like, I don't know if you know anything about like that team, but like their lineup was just stacked. They had Johnny Damon in the leadoff spot. They had Manny Ramirez and David Ortiz in their 3 and 4 spots. Those guys are just power hitters. So they had their superstars that definitely helped this team, and a bullpen that was insane. So they had players that they could afford that were their superstars. And then it's like supplementing this philosophy to fill out their team.
Yeah. Like at the beginning of the movie, they're talking about trying to replace Jambi, guys that get on base. You know, they're trying to find 3 guys that will match Jambi's average of like 360 something.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, let's be honest. Boston was always doing that because they could afford the best players.
Yeah.
They would have had 3 guys, but their average would be higher. Anyway, like by default, your on base average is higher. So it's, that's where this gets a little gray I mean, it's a wonderful story. And, but yeah, it's like, well, you kind of just really shined a light on something that was there the whole time, especially. But from if you want a romantic part of this story is the fact that now suddenly a team that couldn't afford the best players can start to win.
Yeah. And thinking about it that way, if you know, like that Boston is like was a stacked team, it kind of makes it a sad ending where it's like, Billy was championing this thing and like found a new way to do it on their team's budget. And now, earlier in the movie, he says they're organ donors for the rich. And now this is just another thing that the rich teams take from them, which they're already taking their players. Now they're taking their philosophy to improve their teams even more because they have the money to do it. So it's kind of a sad thing where it's like, he loses his best players, and then he also loses the approach that he starts to take to teams that can more effectively use it.
And I think that's why towards the end of the movie, they do have Billy with a line, none of this matters. I just want to change the game. And I think that's why they wanted to get, I don't know if Billy Beane specifically said that he wanted to do that. But as far as his story goes, that's his win. He did change the game.
Yeah.
So I think that's why that's in there. Cause you're right. Otherwise it is like, well, you're still organ donors, for the rich team. So, so the movie ends, he's in his car, and now that you say what actually happened, I think at that point he had probably verbally agreed to do it, and then he decides to stay.
Yeah.
I will say, I wanted to say this because, again, I know this is exactly how it happened, and I'm not saying you should change it because it is exactly how it happened. But like I said, the Billy Beane we saw, the character of Billy Beane, I think should have taken the job at Boston, and frankly, because we talked about how this movie sort of ignores or makes fun of sports tropes.
Yeah.
And I get that they try to shoehorn in that his daughter is the reason he stayed, but you could also make the argument that because he talks about how much he loves Oakland and like, well, I really wanted to win here and stuff like that. But almost this idea of, did he stay because the Oakland Athletics are a family and family comes first. But that's such a sports trope, right?
Yeah.
Like, I like the Billy Beane we saw should have gone to Boston.
That's a fair point.
So it's a nitpick. It is a nitpick of this movie, but that was kind of there's certain the daughter thing and just like I don't buy this Billy not going to Boston. And he's not, again, the movie even sets up the idea that he's not a bad person for doing it because if it's about the money, he's worth it, right? He deserves it. Also, something I looked up, and I don't know if this was at the same time this was happening. I did look up that Billy Beane, at least at some point, was making $3 million a year off the Athletics.
Okay.
The man was not destitute by any stretch of the imagination.
What's another $9.5 million?
Yeah. So by no means did he turn down $30,000 a year at the Athletics for 12.
Yeah. And I mean, there's even like him being like, I'll put up the money for a Rincon, $225,000. It's like, oh, well, that's not nothing. So
Yeah,
That's
take it
some
out of
indicator.
take it out of his daughter's college fund.
Yeah, exactly. I think my one nitpick with this, this is such a small thing, but I have a nitpick that the actor who plays young Billy Bean, I don't think has a good baseball swing. I have to say it. The first time we see him taking batting practice. We don't see where these balls are being hit, but like, the scouts are like, "Oh, this son of a bitch is going to go in the first round." I'm like, based off that swing, I don't know about that.
So Peter Brand was right. He would have taken him in, what do you say, the 7th or the 9th round?
The 9th round, and no signing bonus.
No signing bonus. Pete was right. Pete's always right. You know what's funny? Brad Pitt probably has a better swing than that guy too.
Probably true.
Just better looking, better baseball player. That son of a bitch is better at everything.
Absolutely.
Good Lord. Probably could have done it while eating a hoagie with his other hand. I did actually look up the guy that played young Billy.
Mm-hmm.
I can't find his name. He hasn't really acted. I even looked like, was he a baseball player?
Yeah.
It doesn't look like it. I didn't do that much research into it.
Yeah.
In certain angles, though, God, he looks just like Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
Ugly Brad Pitt.
Brad Pitt for sure.
Got an ugly girlfriend too.
It's probably hard to know too, because we know what young Brad Pitt looks like.
That's just it. That's just it. We all know what he looks like. The guy's been in movies forever, so it's just kind of this thing. It's like, I mean, you almost would have been, if you had the money, you would have been better off just de-aging Brad Pitt.
Yeah, for sure.
Or superimposing his face, because that didn't work. Actually, and I know this wasn't the movie that, since we're talking about Brad, I know this wasn't the movie that he did this for, but I specifically remember when I was a kid, there were certain actors like Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio, maybe Tom Cruise. I don't know if he necessarily fell into this, but these like Hollywood pretty boys. But there were people like Brad and Leo at a certain point decided, I'm not taking roles just as like a handsome leading man. Like they wanted to challenge themselves.
Yeah.
And Brad and Leo both have done such a good job of taking roles that are challenging and they do such an amazing job. So I wish I could remember specifically what movie it was that made me go like, oh, Brad Pitt's like, he's really good at this.
Yeah.
Because he is. And that's why you love watching him in anything. And he's so good in this. And it's all that charisma that just pours out of him. Mm-hmm. Probably burns a lot of calories, all that charisma.
Sure.
So he's got to eat all the time.
This isn't a flashy performance by him, which, he's got his Inglourious Bastards, Burn After Reading performances that are much more over the top. This is so much more, I guess, real, and it feels more real, which I really love.
And I bet he took it because of that. I bet, I'm sure there were a lot of reasons, but I bet he took it because it was like, this is more of a subtle role. And that's like we were talking about where they think they're going to lose that 20th game. And he's got like his head in his hands. Like you feel him just falling apart.
Yeah.
And the way that's cut with all his failures, just like coming to the front for him. So
yeah. I also really love just how well he plays it, that he sounds like he knows what he's talking about.
Yes.
With all this stuff, he sounds like he knows baseball in and out and is comfortable in it. Mm-hmm. And I think that's just so well done.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fantastic. I always like that reminds me of the quote from Martin Scorsese that you don't have to know. And maybe Brad Pitt knows a lot about baseball, but he says you don't have to know. He doesn't really have to know anything about baseball. You need to convince the audience you do, though.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think that's, when actors play like doctors, scientists, like they don't know what they're talking about, but just convince the audience that you do.
For sure.
You got anything else on this movie?
I don't know. We covered a lot. I think I definitely, if people haven't seen it, absolutely check it out.
In case you missed it.
Yeah.
Take a look at Moneyball or haven't watched it in a while. And I will say this is of Bennett Miller. And this is only like the third movie of his I've seen. Mm-hmm. I loved Capote.
Yeah.
Foxcatcher I liked, but I thought, and I know Bennett Miller has a very, I hate to just say slow. That's not a good word, but it's his movies are, they're not in a hurry.
Yeah.
And I thought he pushed that a little too far with Foxcatcher. That was my one issue. This, I think, moves at a fairly brisk pace for a Bennett Miller film.
Yeah, I agree.
Actually, what's interesting about that, I actually had the pleasure as part of, I believe it was the Tribeca Film Festival, to see a conversation between Christopher Nolan and Bennett Miller.
Yeah.
Which was phenomenal because you're just watching two guys who are so deep in this world and so confident in their abilities and have done such great work. Just talk about being filmmakers and being people and being fathers and all this stuff. And it was phenomenal.
Yeah.
But Bennett mentioned, especially because his movies are a little slower pace, sometimes they're a little longer. He watches his film every single day as they're editing and even Chris even went like, how do you watch your movie every day?
Jeez.
But I guess that's kind of how he starts the day when they're in post, is he'll sit and watch the movie. And you know what, how you can do that and not start gutting it by like, just like losing confidence or like I've seen this so many times it's boring, we got to punch it up a little.
I've seen so many times movies or shows just get overcut because people have watched it too much and just start second guessing what they've done.
And didn't you work on a sitcom that was kind of perfectly funny? What happened with that as they kept doing it?
It was a pilot that was like, it was really well done. I thought it was good. And then he just kept cutting things and tightening it and changing things. And it just lost the charm that it had. And I've seen that with, like that and other shows that I've worked on, even like working on shows. There's sometimes where, producers will kind of cut a show down to, and I think when you were talking in one of our last episodes about how like, there's like an artistic element to it where you don't want to just make it textbook, like just cut it down to nothing. I feel like that happens a lot where it's just like, okay, well, we got to keep the story moving. We got to cut this down to where it's like just telling the story. And you kind of lose some of that artistic side of it, or the things that you like had believed in when you'd shot them. Just like cool things that you'd shot and that work. Then you start to second guess and like pull them out, and it's kind of makes it a little more basic.
Yeah. And I give Bennett a lot of credit for watching his movies as much as he does.
Yeah.
And still willing to keep that pace and take a risk on it. I was trying to look up trivia for this. Some of it's kind of interesting, not the most. I did see all but like 4 of the scouts for the Oakland were actual baseball scouts.
Oh yeah, that's cool.
And as we said, if you look at any trivia for this movie, it's a lot of like, this is not what really happened. This is, their success was not contributed just to Moneyball and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
Blah, 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 blah. So,
and I've seen like even the real players, like David Justice has talked about this, how it's like, that's part of the story, but it's not the whole story. And yeah, but I mean, that's a whole other thing where, it works for the movie and the story that the movie's telling. Similar thing to like The Social Network where, a lot of that probably isn't exactly how things went down, but it works in telling the story that movie's wanting to tell, even if it's not the true story.
Yeah, actually. And if we do ever decide to come back and do Social Network, that's such a good example of like, because written by Aaron Sorkin. But that's such a good example of like the Mark Zuckerberg character versus who Mark Zuckerberg is. The Mark Zuckerberg character is an asshole. Yeah. And as I understand it, possibly a little awkward, but Mark Zuckerberg isn't an asshole, but that's the difference. And they've always kind of stressed that Mark Zuckerberg in that movie is a character, but anyway, I don't want to get on that tangent.
Yeah.
Cause we'll be here all day.
Absolutely.
So yeah, Moneyball, in case you missed it, check it out.
Yeah.
It's a good one. I think it's such a good, kind of like when we did Whiplash. I think it's a movie that, maybe if you know something about filmmaking or research it or something like that, you can appreciate it more.
Yeah.
That it's not just about this baseball team winning.
Yep.
Yeah. So I think if anyone wants to avoid spoilers for the next one, we're thinking we're going to do Kubo and the Two Strings.
Yes.
Which Josh has never seen.
I have not. I'm very excited, though, because it's one that I've always wanted to watch because I think just seeing trailers and clips, the animation style just looks incredible.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see what that story is. And I've heard nothing but great things.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I think we'll do that. I think this has been fun. I'm glad I got a reason to watch this movie.
Yeah.
You are much more of a jock than I thought. And
not so much anymore, but
yeah,
early 2000s baseball, late 90s. That's where you get me.
Such a stud.
Yeah.
Yeah. So everyone, thanks for listening. And join us next time for Kubo and the Two Strings.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
It was a nice theory, just not working out.
How long is Billy Bean gonna last?
He's proven himself right out of a job.
In their minds, it's threatening the game. It's threatening the way that they do things.
Hey, Daddy, do you think you'll lose your job?
What? Where did you hear that?
Well, I go on the internet sometimes.
Don't go on the internet. Watch TV or talk to people.
You're discounting what scouts have done for 150 years?